literally turn that thing on its side. So you're sitting there, all of a sudden you're face down to the street. It's like little orientation here now. And then they land. A recon team got on. We get off. The recon team disappeared. It was Spike Team Idaho with Sergeant First Class Glenn Oliver Lane and Robert Owen, and 4 or 5 indigenous troops disappeared, never to be heard from again. Those 2 Green Berets are amongst the 50 Green Berets that are still listed as missing in action today from the Secret War alone in Laos and Cambodia.
My name is Benjamin Bunn. I'm the host of the Warrior Rising podcast. Warrior Rising is the premier veteran transition organization that helps transitioning veterans find their purpose through entrepreneurship. We have self-paced educational modules, continued coaching and mentorship calls, programs sponsored by Grand Valley State University that are nested in their veteran Entrepreneurship Accelerator program. And then, of course, we have our national business showers where qualified individuals from our programs have the opportunity to compete and pitch their brands with other veterans for the opportunity to win grants. It's a fantastic organization. If you want to learn more, you can head over to warriorrising.org. My guest today on the Warrior Rising podcast is John Stryker Meyer. John has an absolutely fantastic background. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to meet him in person in Nashville, Tennessee, while I was at a NatCon event for Warrior Rising. And then as fate would have it, we had an opportunity to have him as our guest speaker, our keynote speaker this evening in Iowa City, or in the Twin City area of Iowa, for our first annual business shower. Really excited to have you here, John. Excited to hear more about your story. I know the last time we spoke, I sat there and was just talking at you for an hour straight while we were at lunch. So I thought I'd return the favor and give you an opportunity to come and talk to me for a little bit. So I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast today. Excited to hear your keynote speech tonight and learn more about you and your story in a way that's a little bit more personal. I did have an opportunity to read your book, so really excited to talk about that and so much more.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a real honor. And then that hour, there were so many things that the Warrior Rising is doing that I was learning. So that day, that lunch with you and Ken was really an eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
And when they extended the invitation to come on out, I said, hell yeah.
Nice.
Sign me up.
Who, I think it was Casey Maxted is who invited you out, or is that who?
Indeed, that was the first phone call.
Yeah.
Right, the first SF guy to work at, reach out.
Yeah, there you go. So, it's interesting. Warrior Rising has got a significant amount of Green Berets that are working inside the organization. So, of course, Jason Van Camp, our executive director, he was a Green Beret. He was in 10th Special Forces Group. Casey Maxted, who you had an opportunity to talk with, he was in 1st Special Forces Group. Me and him went through the Special Forces qualification course together.
The Q course together?
Yeah. Like, we've known each other, no joke, for 20 years. Jason actually went through the Q course at the same time as us.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, we're thick as thieves in terms of having individuals from the regiment there. But I think a great place to start is, we spend a lot of time talking to veterans that come from that GWAT era, the Global War on Terror, a lot of individuals that joined the military after September 11th or around that time frame.
Sure.
And spent their formative years kind of, kicking the can down the road in both Iraq and Afghanistan, as it were. But I think it's interesting that we're having an opportunity to kind of talk to folks that, came from that generation before. And I think it's so interesting, and we're lucky to have an opportunity to talk to Vietnam era veterans because, you're able to paint a picture that, is very different from ours. But I think it's like a same in a lot of ways, right? I think there's a lot of civil turmoil right now. I think it was the same during the Vietnam War. And we would love to hear kind of about like what it was like for you as you were joining the military. And we always ask people, what brought you to the military, what your military experience was like, and then, of course, what that transition looked like.
Well, my story for getting started was fairly quick. Basically, I had been in college for 2 years and flunked out.
Okay.
And so back then you had to draft.
Yeah.
And so once you lost your 4S exemption from service until you're done college, which I lost when you flunk out, Dad sent me a letter, said, hey, the notice from the boards here, you're going to get drafted. And like within a week or so, I was working in Yosemite National Park at the time.
Yeah.
And so I had a job as a sanitation engineer, which is AKA trash man.
Okay.
And then a part-time job if needed for a firefighter, which I never fought any fires.
Yeah.
And so part of that routine was working the roads in the south part of the park.
Okay.
And they had a little store that had a bookshelf that had the Green Berets on it. So like I get the note from my dad, I buy the book, and I just can't put it down. It's the Green Berets by Robin Moore. And I knew that as a city slicker that if I'm going to get drafted, I need more training than 8 weeks of basic and 8 weeks of advanced infantry training.
Yeah.
Besides, I'm a slow learner. So, so I went back to, after the summer, I went back to Trenton.
Yeah.
I went to junior college for a couple of weeks and just said, this is ridiculous. I enlisted and listed for the program. At that time, was airborne unassigned. And so after you go through basic training, you're going through AIT, the SF recruiters come out,
Yeah.
run you through the battery of tests, passed all the tests. And the recruiter told me, he said, "You're lucky, Meyer. We lowered the standards." So from there, after AIT, jumped school, Fort Bragg for 7 months.
Yeah.
Training there, got recycled as a commo geek. And then before NOM, we had 3 months training on RTT, radio teletype.
Okay.
Landed in Vietnam in April of '68. And after the in-country training, the last day, a little guy comes out and said, "We're looking for volunteers." Well, for what? Johnny McIntyre, my buddy, goes, "For what?" And we go, "Can't say. Either you're in or you're not."
Yeah.
So, of course, we volunteered. We'd just seen the movie, The Green Berets with John Wayne.
Yeah.
What would the Duke do? So it turned out to be there was a secret war that had been conducted. It was an 8-year secret war from 64 until 72. And by 68, everything had been ramped up. The NVA had their act together more so in Laos and Cambodia, even though publicly they denied having people there.
Yeah.
And we had no Americans stationed there, either in Laos or Cambodia. In the early 60s, JFK assigned or our country assigned an accord saying we would have no combat troops there. And the communists said, "Oh, yeah, we won't either." Of course, they always lied. They're communists.
Sure.
They stayed there. And so we volunteered, and that's where it got into the, it was called MACV-SOG, acronym SOG, Studies and Observations Group.
Yeah.
So that was in the Navy budget. So they had to hide that from the public as well as the nosy reporters.
So let me backtrack here.
Sure.
This is an interesting story. So you and I don't want to, I definitely don't want to sound like I'm insulting in any way.
You're not.
But you're like, I'm a college.
We're talking.
Yeah. You're like, I'm a college dropout.
Right.
And this is a time.
No, flunk out.
Flunk out. Yeah, you didn't just get out of your own accord.
No.
You were doing poorly in college.
Hit the road, Toad.
Yeah, and it's interesting because at the time that I joined when I was 17. I was also like, I was fresh out of options. I had no other options, and of course, we weren't a country at war at the time. But I certainly wasn't, joining because I had, machinations of being patriotic or anything. And I wish I did, and I think back on it, I'm like, damn, man, I wish I would have been more like that. But for me, I was kind of fresh out of options, and not too dissimilarly from you. After I had deployed a couple times, I remember seeing those SF guys, and I remember how I felt like I was just getting shot at. I felt like I was just walking around waiting for something to happen to me.
Right.
And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I want them walking around thinking something's getting ready to happen to them. And as far as I could tell, the only people that were making that happen were the Green Berets, were the SF guys. And I remember I had told my girlfriend at the time, I was like, I think I'm going to try and join the Special Forces. I think I'm going to try and become a Green Beret. And it sounds like that's kind of you not out of options, but you're like, there's a draft going, and if I'm going to be part of this, I think I'm going to be part of an outfit that's maybe a tier above the rest. And you had read the Green Berets, and then that's how you kind of kicked off your journey into the special operations community. And no joke, it sounds like as soon as you had gotten in country, found yourself in the midst of a secret war.
Right. And then and that summer that I flunked out was 66.
Yeah.
And by that time, two things had happened that were in the back of my tiny mind.
Yeah.
Roger Donlin earned the first Medal of Honor. His A camp was overrun in July 1964. He received the Medal of Honor in December of 1964. So that was the first Medal of Honor from the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And it was issued to a Green Beret, a captain from his camp. And that was there. And we had the Battle of the Green Berets that been playing. And that one line,
Yeah.
100 men will test today, but only 3 will wear the Green Beret.
Yeah.
That stuck. It's like, if I ever get to be a chance to get close to the 3, even if they expand it to 6,
Yeah.
it's like, that's something to be proud of, and
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah, I remember, and to this day, you still will sing the Barry Sadler song in formation.
Oh, yeah.
In the Q course.
And every graduation, we just attended a graduation class down there.
That's right.
They sing it after they get that beret.
Yeah,
for the first time.
everybody-
Don the beret.
Everybody sings it. It's funny. I have a record player, and one of the first records that I went to go find was the Barry Sadler record.
No kidding.
Yeah, I got it at the house. It's great. I found it at like some place in St. Petersburg, Florida. But it's like probably one of my most prized records of that and the Wu-Tang Clan. So you find yourself in Vietnam. You've volunteered to essentially participate in a secret war that's kind of being waged in some of the bordering nations to Vietnam that are kind of participating and helping back Vietnamese forces at this time that were at odds with American forces. Tell us a little bit about what that was like and what your experience was like for the time that you were in Vietnam, and what years were you there from?
Well, I arrived in April '68. In-country training was a couple weeks, and then we volunteered. And then the next day we flew up to, and the 5th Special Forces Group was headquartered in Trang,
Yeah.
which was in 2 Corps, I think. And then we flew up to Da Nang at what was then FOB 4. In '68, there were 6 FOBs from the north, which was FOB 1, Phu Bai. 3 was Khe Sanh. And then others were south, 5 and 6. And then Kon Tum was FOB 2. And so we go in for the top secret briefing. So we pull out our pads and pens, and the sergeant major goes, "Put that shit away. This is a top secret briefing." In front of you, there's a piece of paper. It's an NDA. Read it and sign it, or you can leave. And that NDA said we couldn't talk about anything from this date forward about the secret war for 20 years.
Yeah.
Couldn't talk to mama or your girlfriend, anybody. We signed it. They pulled the curtain down, and there was the map. South Vietnam with all the cities, and then Laos and Cambodia with target boxes.
Yeah.
Welcome to the secret war. And so the other part of that welcome was when we had gone through all the in-country training, and even in the States, we had traditional helicopters, the Hueys, the Chinook.
Yeah.
And so we go to the airport at Da Nang to get a flight to FOB-1 Phu Bai. Welcome to the South Vietnamese Air Force. They're flying Sikorsky H-34s. That's a 9-cylinder engine that's in B-17s. And those old engines, when they start up, they cough, they sputter, they spit things out. And inside the passenger compartment, there's fluids on the floor.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, they didn't tell us about this.
So it's like, hey, and just no big deal. This thing is kind of like sputtering and cranking all around. And oh, by the way, when you're riding in it, you're just kind of like covered in accelerant. You know what I mean?
Either that, some kind of lubricant might get into your hair and give you that extra dude. You had to put your beret away so they didn't get any oil on it.
Yeah.
And so that was the first introduction, which is like, oh, they didn't tell us we were going to be flying with our allies.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out the South Vietnamese were completely heroic. And the tail end of that story, we landed Phu Bai, and of course, it was a Sikorsky had a door on the right. If you at the back of the plane, a helicopter on the right, there's a door. So we go up Highway 1, and we go up, and they literally turn that thing on its side. So you're sitting there, all of a sudden you're face down to the street. It's like little orientation here now. And then they land. A recon team got on. We get off. The recon team disappeared. It was Spike Team Idaho with Sergeant First Class Glenn Oliver Lane and Robert Owen, and 4 or 5 indigenous troops disappeared, never to be heard from again. Those 2 Green Berets are amongst the 50 Green Berets that are still listed as missing in action today from the secret war alone in Laos and Cambodia. And so that was quite a rude introduction to the secret war.
Yeah. And I think what's so interesting, and we had a chance to talk with Bill Hawk Albrecht last evening, and Mac v. Sog, the secret war that was being waged, across the border in Cambodia, Laos, these places. I think what's really interesting about it is, it's dual-fold. One, it was that war was waged secretly. Two, at the time, Vietnam was a really unpopular war. So there was this long period of time after Vietnam where no stories were told at all about what was taking place during that time frame. And it was dual pronged. I think the American public maybe didn't have an appetite for it. Veterans who were treated poorly when they came back home from Vietnam, probably didn't. They weren't in a rush to talk about it. And also, a lot of it was just classified. It's top secret. You literally weren't allowed to talk about it. So there was this long period of time where the American public at large just hadn't known what had taken place. What was it like for you to have had this great depth of knowledge about what was taking place? This war that was divorced from what was taking place, in Vietnam proper, that the American people had no idea about. The government had just kind of thrown you into it. You would continuously volunteered to be in the military, volunteered to be airborne, volunteered to be a Green Beret, volunteered to go participate in a secret. I mean, you're a 4-time volunteer at this point. You know what I mean? If you
Right.
think about it, you're either patriotic or a sucker. But
Or a little bit of both.
yeah, maybe a little bit of both. But you had volunteered, to participate in these hard things, these difficult things, and things that, by far and wide, the American public just never got to hear about for a long period of time. What was it like to kind of carry around that information, to know that you had participated in these things? I mean, things that are hard to reconcile, incredible things, I bet, like memories that are going to stick with you forever. Probably what I'm sure what felt like at the time, and probably for a long time after that, the most important thing that you had done.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and to come back and not be able to talk about it, or not to be able to share it. It's
Yeah, it'd be like the dinner table. Mom would go, "What did you do in Vietnam, Johnny?" Well, we were pretty busy. I could talk to him about the people I served with, like Spider
yeah,
Parks, Hep, Salve, my Vietnamese team members, what great men they were.
yeah,
But at that point, say, these guys are great guys. Pass the peas,
yeah,
and we really couldn't talk about it.
yeah. When did you start actually having an opportunity to kind of share those stories?
Well, I began to cheat a little bit because I signed the NDA in '68.
Yep.
So by '88 of April, that would have been, I've run the 20 years. But I met Robert K. Brown from Soldier of Fortune magazine.
Oh man, awesome. Okay, great.
Oh, yeah. And I picked up a nom de guerre because I was working at a newspaper at the time in San Diego. Had they known I was writing for Soldier of Fortune,
Yeah,
they would have shook canned me to New York City second.
I bet.
So I had the nom de guerre. We did a few stories about the operations, which are mostly positive,
Yeah,
but extended some light on it. And before I started writing, another reporter had done some things. They introduced their readers to Mac v. Sog.
yeah.
So I followed up with some different stories that I later incorporated into my first book, Across the Fence.
Okay. And I think, and it's so interesting that, I mean, you had to wait 20 years to really substantively talk about what your experiences were like. And
Oh, yeah, and they were serious about it. I mean, my dad, after my first book came, he read the book. He goes, now I know why they came by. There was a black guy that came by, tall black guy that came by and picked up our trash. They literally came and picked up our trash and took it back to the office to make sure that I wasn't writing home anything
yeah,
and that I shouldn't be writing about or talking about.
yeah, it's so interesting. And I think, obviously when I was in the Special Forces qualification course, they talk about Mac v. Sog a lot. And, when I was in SEER school, we had individuals, both that spent time in the POW camps and were Mac v.
Right.
Sog operators. And, it was interesting because I had never known the full scope, of what was taking place until I actually had an opportunity to train to be in the regiment. And then of course started to learn more about our lineage, the shared lineage, from the Green Berets, all the way back to World War II until current. So I think it's so interesting, and I think we're lucky that individuals like you have the opportunity to kind of tell those stories. So I think otherwise we would have never heard them. We would have never heard them. And I think the 80th anniversary of the invasion of D-Day is coming up here in June.
Right around the corner, yeah.
Right around the corner, and it might be it might be the last year that we have, individuals that are alive that jumped in. Right?
The guys that are 100 plus.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is the year, this is the 60th anniversary of the formation of SOG.
Yeah, that's wild, right? And
Oh, yes.
and I think about it all the time. And I was talking to my stepdad, who's a Vietnam veteran, and I was just like, it's so important that we get these stories out there. So you're in Vietnam. You're participating in a secret war. Tell us a little bit about what that was like, what your formative time in Vietnam was like, and kind of how you spent your time before you eventually transitioned out.
Yeah, basically, with SOG, we had recon teams and hatchet forces. And a hatchet force could be a platoon, squad, or maybe even a company-size operation. Like they had one in 1970, Operation Tailwind, where they had 120 indigenous troops, 16 Green Berets that went deep into Laos for 4 days. They knocked out two major weapons, cache sites, and they barely got out alive. And there were 32 Purple Hearts issued to those 16 Green Berets alone.
God
So that's a
bless.
hatchet force.
Yeah.
With the recon teams, it would be anywhere from 1 to 3 Green Berets running with indigenous troops. And the indigenous could be, in my case, it was South Vietnamese, could be Nungs, Cambodians, or Montagnard tribesmen. And they were all good when they were trained up. So in my case, we had to rebuild the team. So we Spider Parks had been on Idaho, got promoted to a team. Once Idaho got wiped out, he came back to take over the Green Beret team leader. Don Wolken was the assistant. And fortunately, our interpreter and the Vietnamese counterpart, our Vietnamese team leader, they had missed that rotation for that mission. Hep had been sick. Hep was the interpreter, and Sal was our counterpart. So with Spider, they went back. We hired 3 15-year-olds, added them to the survivors from the team, and then we trained up and did night ambushes locally. Eventually did a couple of missions where we inserted Air Force sensors along the trails, part of those programs where McNamara had. So we installed one in the Ashaw Valley, one by Quezon, and then we ran missions. So the mission would be 2 or 3 Green Berets. And the South Vietnamese on my team were so good that after I became the team leader in October 1968, I just had myself and another American, usually. There'd be 2 of us and then 4 or 6 South Vietnamese. And they were just absolutely fearless, great men. And they knew the jungle better than we did. They ran point. We had them on the tail security. And they found all the pit vipers and anything else that could ruin our day on a recon going through the jungle. And of course, we stayed in the jungle. We didn't get on trails. Some of our teams that were dressed like all NVA, they could do that.
Yeah.
But us with the gringos and our South Vietnamese, we stayed in the jungle. And when we moved through the jungle, it'd be like, move 10, wait 10, just to listen so the jungle could come back to its normal rhythm.
Yeah.
If it didn't come back, you knew you may have company.
Damn.
Not friendly in nature.
Yeah.
So I ran missions with them until the end of April of '69. Lynn Black took over the team, went back to 10th Group for 5 months, hated every second of it there at Fort Devens.
Yeah.
I got stuck in the Commo Company, and all of our guys from SOG went to Delta Company, and they were doing like real Green Beret stuff, training, going to Germany, going up to the mountains, and just being real Green Berets. Me,
Yeah.
it was like a commo geek stuck with these young guys. We had 2 butter bars that ran it, and they handled like basic training. So I just didn't get along. When I went to the Pentagon, I got my orders cut to go back to CCN. At that point, which was the old FOB4, landed in country in October '69. Got back on the team. Lynn was still the 1-0. We took turns being 1-0 for a little bit.
Sure.
Then Lynn went to some special assignments in SOG, and I stayed on the recon team until April of 1970, and then came home.
Man, that is a lot of time in country. And I think it's, did you have an opportunity to kind of see what conventional forces were doing in theater and kind of measure that up against the type of operations that you were involved with?
A little bit.
Yeah.
We were in country. We had our training range was outside of the base. We always drove out to the main firing range, and we have some exposure to that. And of course, we did patrols local.
Yeah.
There's a community north of FOB1, and we would do patrols through there outside, and then we had ambushes at night. And our interpreter would make sure that the village people, the chief, knew that after 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whatever it was, our ambush would be set up. You walked into that ambush, you were dead.
Yeah, you had big problems.
Right.
Yeah.
But we had a good rapport with them, so we never had any problem. We set up ambushes, never triggered one at night.
Nice.
And I was in country. Things were a little different across the fence.
Yeah.
And so we just continued to do the missions, and as we did it, things got more intensified. By 1968, Johnson had the bombing pause, which enabled the commandos to bring more anti-aircraft, more heavy artillery, and more troops. So by 1968, in Laos, there was 25 to 30,000 troops there.
Yeah.
Plus, they forced all the local people to work with them to build the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is all the supplies came south. And then Cambodia had 50 to 100,000.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And that was our job, was to go out and see what they were doing.
Yeah.
Try to give any early reports. And that was the long and the short of it.
You know, I think it's one of the most interesting things about, one of the most interesting things about the Special Forces mission is foreign internal defense, right? And when you say foreign internal defense, people are like, what exactly does that mean? And it essentially means like, I'm working with partnered forces, like.
Oh, yeah.
And I always, it could be for sure frustrating at times from my perspective when I was working both in Iraq and Afghanistan, like trying to get individuals who, somebody who might have just ran a shop at one point, and now we're saying like, hey, listen, you're in actuality now you're in the Iraqi army, or now you're in the Afghan army, or now you're an Iraqi police officer in this municipal area, or whatever the case may be, and trying to get that individual who had no military experience and probably like, underneath what was a very brutal authoritarian regime, probably did not want to run into individuals in the military or the police or anybody in the Ba'athist Party, just wanted to mind his own business. And now all of a sudden, we're in this protracted engagement, this conflict, and, they're working with special forces. And I think that was always really frustrating on our end. We would have guys that were fantastic, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. If we were working with people locally, the analogy that I used to use was, if the cops are chasing me through my neighborhood and they're not from that neighborhood, they're not going to get me.
Right.
They don't know what fence to jump over. They don't know which yard has a dog in it. They don't know my neighbors. If I'm on the run, right? If I'm on the run from the police and I see my neighbor, Lisa or Miss Pearl, and she's like, what's going on, Ben? What do you got going on right now?
Yeah.
I said, Lisa, there's a cop coming after me. I don't know why, but if he drives by, you didn't see me. And she would just nod her head and she'd be like, no problem, right?
Or you'd be hiding under the bed.
Yeah. And the same can be said if you're working with partnered forces. If you think that you're going to have an impact locally in Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, whatever the case may be, you don't know the area. You do not know that area.
Absolutely.
You are in their backyard. And if you think that you're going to chase them and get them, in their own neighborhood, you are bananas. So you have to pair up with local forces. And I think one of the things that is so incredible about the Vietnam era Green Berets, and something that, current Green Berets could definitely learn is the close, tight-knit relationships that you had with the Montagnards and some of, those local forces that you were able to pair up with. Deep personal relationships. And everything I've ever heard is they were just as capable as our own troops, and in some cases more so.
Oh, in the jungle, they were better.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, like when I got introduced to the team, Spider Parks introduced me.
Yeah.
And so Sal, he looked at me and turned to Hep. He goes, he's too tall, his feet are too big, and he looks stupid.
Yeah.
And I had to earn his respect.
Yeah, I bet. And listen, I can imagine. Yeah, like how tall are you?
6'2".
60, man, hey, being 6'2" and having a full head of hair is like having superpowers. So I'm gonna tell you that right now, John. I know, I love that that they said that, because same thing, right? Like I think the first time when I was in the Special Forces qualification course, and I was trying to break brush, probably just in selection, and I'm walking through a draw or something like that, and I come out the backside of it. I'm missing equipment. A pocket's been torn off my uniform. I look like I've tried to navigate my way through razor wire, and it was just, a bunch
And
of
you lost.
yeah, and looking just beat up, when I was in selection.
Yeah.
And I remember towards the end when I was in Robin Sage and we had some of our, our Gs, our guerrilla
Right.
forces, which I think at that time were, regular Army guys that were training with us. And I'm just like on a knee with my rucksack on, like watching them like weirdly getting tangled up in the brush. And I'm like, I remember thinking to myself, I was like, God, man, these assholes just don't know how to walk through the woods. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, sure.
And it's so interesting to see that there's that learning curve. And it's funny that, that he's too tall and he looks stupid.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And Hep wouldn't tell me what he said for 6 months
Yeah.
until after I had been accepted, was part of the team, and I became the team leader.
Yeah.
But our situation with that team, we were molded.
Yeah.
So Spider and Sal worked us through the contingency drills, the immediate action drills, over and over again.
Yeah.
And like I said, once we got on the ground on the target, they ran point.
Yeah.
And when I was a team leader, I'd be behind the point man or the second man behind the point man. So we trusted them implicitly. I'm alive today thanks to the South Vietnamese on my team and the South Vietnamese helicopter pilots. They pulled our team out of so many firefights. Every time we were pulled out under enemy fire.
Yeah.
It wasn't a question of whether or not we were under enemy fire. The only question was how much.
Yeah. I tell you, anytime I have an opportunity, if I ever meet Apache pilots out in the wild,
oh yeah,
it's not hard to track them down. They'll tell you immediately that they're an
Yeah.
Apache pilot. They'll volunteer that information quickly. But I will say this: anytime I meet an Apache pilot out in the wild, I never let them pay for their drinks. I've gotten pulled out of a lot of tight spots because of a 30mm cannon on an Apache. Yeah. Well, did you ever have an opportunity to kind of backtrack or keep in touch with any of those individuals?
Sadly, the only person on Idaho was Hep, my interpreter.
Yeah.
When Saigon fell, he was able to escape. Eventually, came to Vietnam. The History Channel did a production called Suicide Missions.
Yeah.
And in it, I held the picture that's on the front page of Across the Fence, my first book.
Sure.
And on it, of course, is Hep and Sal. So I got a phone call a couple of days after it appeared, essentially saying, the History Channel, we got a guy who says his uncle is on your picture. And so it was the nephew of Hep, who lived in Carlsbad, 10 miles away from where I lived.
No way.
Yeah, so I drive down, I see this kid. He gives me Hep's phone number. I call him up. He gives me a world of shit for not talking to him in 20 years.
Yeah.
So he came to Orange County for a wedding.
Where was he living? Where was he at?
He was living in Houston.
Oh, he was just in Houston?
Yeah.
What was he doing?
He set up a pet shop.
He set up a pet shop. He went from Matt V. Sog, interpreter, to he's just running a pet shop. He's like selling kids puppies and stuff.
And during that transition, he had gone through civic jobs, working for Houston, but he ended up in Houston. And he had his own pet shop by that time.
Hey, listen, that's the American dream, though. I had...
I can tell you, on 9/11,
yeah,
I get a phone call from Hep.
Yeah.
He goes, Mike, can you believe those fuckers hit our country? Let's get Sal, get a king. We go back and kill them. Because that's how American he was.
I know.
The spirit.
I talk a lot about what it means to be American. And I tell people all the time that my favorite kind of American are first generation Americans.
Oh, yeah.
And people all the time they'll ask me, every now and again, people, there's a lot of civil unrest. America has issues. It's growing pains. We're a young country. I mean, we are a young country. But I'll tell you this. I could live in France for 20 years. I could have French citizenship, right?
Uh-huh.
I could live in Japan. I could learn the language. I could understand the culture. I could have citizenship. I can open up a store. I got news for you. I will never be French. I will never be Japanese. I will never be French. I will never be Japanese. But I got news for you. You could move here. You could move here from somewhere else, from another country. You could be here for 6 months, right? And all you need is a green card. And all you need is to pay taxes. And all you need is to be able to navigate and walk around on these streets, these American streets. You are American.
Oh, yeah.
You're American. That is the only place where that happens. That is the only place where that happens. There's a reason hundreds of thousands of people are trying to walk their way into this place, and it's because it kicks ass. America kicks ass. And I tell people that all the time. I had a couple of my interpreters. I don't want to say their names because it's still kind of fresh, but that made it back, and it was it's such a relief. And now that I think back, I mean, at first I was like, great, they made it to America, but as I've had time to get older and really think about it, it's like I'm so happy that they're able to be here, and I'm so happy that they're able to enjoy the same kind of life that I have, based especially on just how things were in the initial invasion of Iraq, and how things were during some of my deployments to Afghanistan, and some of my interpreters who were Peshmerga, who were Kurdish, did not make it out. When ISIS kind of took over the majority of some of those southern regions of Syria and northern Iraq. They went back to fight, and it did not go well for them, right? A lot of
Was
them
another
died.
parallel between today's Afghan vets and our vets.
Yeah,
You had your August 16th, 2021, and then we had April 30th, 1975.
yeah,
The only difference was that in 1975, particularly if you're just a poor gringo like me, living paycheck to paycheck, you couldn't do much other than pray.
yeah,
At least today's vets, you're able to get online. You have things like the Pineapple Express.
yep.
A gentleman, Tom Lanning, who was my technician for my Solidcast interviews, he's in fifth group. He helped more than 200 people come back.
This is a great segue then. So
Sure.
tell me, so you're out of the military now.
Right.
You've spent significant time in country, probably during some of the most intense warfare and conflict since Korea, more than likely, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you're back in the private sector. You've transitioned out of the military. Tell me a little bit about what that transition was like for you, and where you ended up.
It was good. I mean, for me, I knew all the stories.
Yeah,
Like myself, like Lynn Black, when Lynn came back, he came into Seattle, and he was in a hurry to get somewhere, and he tried to take a shortcut. And he was at the airport. He wound up going outside of the actual terminal to a long corridor. It was dark, it was at night. So 4 or 5 brothers come up to him and said, "Hey, you're a Vietnam vet. You're just back from Vietnam, right?" "Yeah." He says, "Well, you got all that money. Why don't you just give us your money so you don't have to carry all that weight?" And so Lynn pulled out his little Browning 25 millimeter,
yeah,
put it around in chamber, and the guy goes, "You can't fool me. That's a cigarette lighter." He goes, put it around between his legs right there.
yo.
They left. He continued to march. But that's the kind of reception some people got.
Yeah, and listen, I want to talk about that, right? When Vietnam was an unpopular war, sometimes with the people that had fought in it as a result of them being draftees, and also I think with the American people at large, and that seems to be the sentiment, right?
Well, I might just say that particularly like today, we have this division between the left coast and the least coast.
Yeah,
The major cities, you have all the people that are basically going with the woke and everything that's anti-American.
sure.
You had a lot of that then, but you still had the core of America.
Yeah,
When you got outside of the big cities and wherever you went, you still were treated with respect. I don't want to push the brush too wide of a stroke, but
sure.
yeah, it was unpopular because of the media was on it.
Yeah.
They're down, and like today's media, they may or may not report the facts.
Well, I will say this. My stepfather, I told you how
Oh, yeah.
at one point when he was walking through the airport, and people were treating, service members so poorly that he went into the bathroom, took off his uniform, stuffed it in the trash can, and walked out in civvies, because
Oh, yeah.
he was afraid to be seen in uniform. And I'll tell you, anytime I came back from a deployment, or if I had for some reason shown up in an airport just in uniform coming back, from the Middle East, I mean, I was treated like an absolute. I would have had to fight tooth and nail just to get out of the airport sober, because everybody would have been buying me a
Right.
drink, and I was treated like a hero all the time. And I don't feel like our Vietnam era veterans had that same experience. And good, bad, or indifferent, I think that's a good piece of perspective, specifically for individuals that are transitioning from the military right now, because I think by far and wide, regardless of the division that exists in our nation, I think everybody appreciates our service members.
There's a delineation down, I think,
Yeah.
that stems from Vietnam. It's one of the benefits that came out of it.
That's an interesting perspective, right? It's
Absolutely.
like the lesson we learned.
The real people that live here saw that. And it's like, even today, if they sent our people to the wrong war or did something wrong based on orders they received from their country,
Yeah.
they separated from the politics. And the veterans that serve are always welcome back, regardless of whether you hung bombs underneath an F-16 jet
Yeah.
or whether you're in combat like a special forces troop
Yeah.
up against the most extreme elements that we confronted in your war and in our war.
Yeah. So you get out, you've transitioned out. Tell me what life was like once you're back on the ground here in the United States.
I was really lucky. I had my family.
Yeah.
First and foremost, we had our church where I had friends that I was close friends with before I went in. They were all there. Came home in April. We had our church softball league, so I got back with our team. And we won the championship that summer.
Nice.
And my dad got me a job doing driving school buses. And within a week, one of my first school bus drives was integration was going on. So we go, and I had a school bus full of preschoolers and kindergarten, little kids. And we were integrating them, driving into the heart of Trenton, into an Italian neighborhood where they didn't want Black children.
Yeah.
And they stoned my school bus, and I was there without my car 15. I knew who I wanted to hit.
Well, it would be interesting for a school bus driver to have a car 15, but you might have needed it at the time.
But my school bus got stoned. I could not believe this was happening in Trenton, but it did. So that was a little sidebar. And then there was an ad in the local paper that said for Mack trucks.
Yeah.
And so it was nondescript. So I go down, I get a quick interview with the guy, and it turns out they wanted mechanics and things. And I said, I saw another ad in the paper where they want drivers. There was a company to haul dirt.
Yeah.
But they need trained Mack truck drivers. I said, hey, can I get a little driving course from you? I said, no. He said, we're here to sell Mack trucks. And well, what do you do? I said, well, I could bring napalm in close enough to suck the oxygen out of your lungs. We could do a gun run. And he laughed because he was a World War II vet.
Okay, nice. Okay.
Yeah, so the guy's cool with it. So he says,
cool.
I'm sorry. But anyway, so I went out and got trained up independently to drive Mack trucks for that summer.
Yeah.
To get some work. And then, but I went back to college.
Nice.
And then when I went back, there was a school newspaper, and I'd been in a school newspaper in 8th and 9th grade, and I liked sports. So I wrote sports stories and then did some feature stories, rock and roll, got more involved with the school paper. So from the school paper, I was editor for 2 years.
Yeah.
Editor-in-chief. And then when I graduated...
How old were you at this time?
A grand total of 28 when I graduated in 1974.
That's pretty amazing.
Well, I was a slow learner. I was a freshman in 1964.
Yeah.
I graduated in 74, so 10 years to get my dumb ass through college.
Hey, brother, same. I joined at 17, got some college credit, but I actually didn't get my college degree until I was 30. So sounds like me and you got a couple parallels by the
You were worse than me.
Yeah, a little bit. Maybe just you were a little bit.
Took you 13 years.
Yeah, you were more better for sure.
So for now, I just on the whim, I was in Trenton, New Jersey. They had a good paper in town. It's called the Trenton Times.
Sure.
I applied just on a whim. I went down and interviewed twice, and the editor was a World War II vet, and Dick Harwood. And he said, come on in. So I went in, worked there for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then went to San Diego. The ownership changed. The Washington Post had owned the Trenton Times, and when the ownership changed, things went downhill. I was fighting my editors more than I was fighting the people I was trying to write my stories about.
Sure.
So I went to San Diego and was there on the San Diego Union for about 8 years. Then went to a little paper up in North San Diego County called the North County Times. Up there for 15 years. 2008, was fired from the job, part of a scale back.
Yep.
And from there, I went to work for a nonprofit as Interfaith Community Services. They had a magnificent program there helping 144 veterans maintain housing. They had beds for them, had programs. So I worked there for a few years and then finally went to a nonprofit up in Orange County. And up there we had the help veterans get affordable housing. We had many communities, and that program up there I worked with, it was run by the key player was today he's a 91-and-a-half-year-old Green Beret, an SF original.
Yeah.
He was in 52, went over with the first ship, the first Green Berets to march into Bad Tolz.
Hell yeah.
And so I worked with them.
A Jedburgh, man.
Well, one after the Jedburgh,
Yeah.
but still, he was just a stud.
Yeah.
And to this day, he's in better shape than a lot of guys 30 years younger than him.
Yeah.
So anyway, I worked with them until 2020 when we moved to Tennessee.
Nice. I just want to backtrack on this real fast.
Sure.
It's you.
We could have used the Warrior Rising program. Had I come back from Nam, clicked into Warrior Rising, I would have found myself.
It's interesting. Warrior Rising existed, very new organization as I was transitioning. And I tell our executive director, Jason Van Camp, all the time, I'm like, man, I wish I had just known that this organization existed. Because I came back home and opened a gym, and it was like so difficult, and I had no help, and I had to do it on my own. But don't get me wrong, I pulled up my bootstraps and I got it done,
Sure.
and it was a fantastic experience for me. And I think a lot of that has made me who I am today. But I would have loved to have had the help. But it's so interesting that you were kind of out of the frying pan and into the fire. You came back, and in the midst of as they were integrating the country, right? And rocks are being thrown at your bus. But you said something when you came back. I was like, what was it like transitioning? You said, I had my family and I had my church. I had my family and I had my church. And you got yourself a job and you got involved and you were involved in your community. I think that's really important. And I think that's something that's worth pointing out. And it doesn't always have to look. I think family and friends are important. Investing in relationships is important. And I think it's more so important now. And I think like whether it's church, whether it's a local nonprofit, whether it's having a job, but just like being involved in your community.
Come back, like Jocko says. You come back with a new mission.
Yeah, and I think it's the secret sauce. And
clearly,
and I don't think we should overthink it. But anytime like I meet a veteran, and I'm like, do you have a place to do you have Howard? Do you love your wife? Are you spending time building your family? If you don't have a family yet. Do you have close friends that are I have good friends, and like my good friends, when I've done something crazy or I've messed up personally, I feel bad that I'm like, God damn it, I'm going to have to talk to him about this.
They pull you aside and whisper in your ear, Ben, you walked on yours.
They hold me accountable. They hold me accountable, not because they want to shame me, but because they love me and they care about me. And I think having people in your life that love and care about you, building strong relationships in your family, in your community is important for transition. And it sounds like you had a good transition because of that, right?
Absolutely. And plus, there was a couple of people that I reconnected with. One was Doug Letourneau and then Spider Parks.
Yeah.
But I remember a couple of times after Doug and I reconnected around about 1990, 91, we were talking on the phone one day. I was just having a bad day.
Yeah.
So I'm whining like a wimp. He goes, hey, do you know where you are right now?
Yeah.
A, you're alive. You're not KIA in Laos.
Yeah.
Nobody's shooting at you with AK-47s, and there's no bullshit coming down from the high command.
Yeah.
You got your lovely wife. You got your kids. Shut up and go to work.
Yeah.
Okay, Sarge. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you spent, by your count, spent a lot of time working with veteran service organizations. Thank you for that, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
And then it sounds like you also spent a good amount of time writing for both local, municipal, and what it sounds like state organizations. Did that?
Well, there are newspapers. I mean, I don't tell anybody now where I used to work, because the media today is just so biased and wrong. It's just different.
Yeah.
They advocate. They don't separate fact from fiction. They have opinion. I mean, most of the networks now are just embarrassing.
Sure.
And the stories they won't cover.
Yeah.
That's like utter bullshit. On our day, you had to get both sides of the story.
But you leveraged that experience writing, and then you wrote a couple books.
Well, yeah, I've never been really a strong writer. I was always a good reporter.
Sure.
You saw, like the old saying in our day was you could be a good writer and an okay reporter because you could write your way around it.
Sure.
Or you're a really good reporter like I was. Your writing sucked, but you always had a good editor that would back you up. So I've been blessed with great editors over the years.
Sure.
And so my writing skills have improved a little bit. And then my second book, I worked with John Peters, who I served with at FOB1. He was on Recon Spike Team Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Scary bright guy, just so bright. And My second book, The Best Lines, John wrote those. We worked it together.
Well, tell because those that are tuning in or those that are listening, they might not know about the books. Tell us a little bit about the books. I want to know more about them.
Well, the first book was Across the Fence. That came out around about 2003.
Yes, sir.
And with some of my stories, we had stories about other recon teams because if you look at a scale of danger from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst mission,
Yeah.
mine would be around a 5 or a 6 maybe. There's a couple that were really pretty hairy.
Yeah.
But compared to other stories like John Walton from Walmart,
Yeah.
his recon team got overrun 3 times, and John brought back everybody who was still alive.
Yeah.
And Tom Cunningham had his leg blown off. He brought him back. Another guy shot 4 times. He brought him back. The team leader was full of shrapnel and wounds. John saved them all, brought him back.
Yeah.
And a South Vietnamese Air Force pilot returned them. He came back to pick them up on the LZ.
Yeah.
And then Lynn Black, we had a 9-man team that came up against 10,000 NVA. And we know that because Lynn, years later, talked to the NVA who ambushed his team.
Yeah.
So he knew that it was 10,000 from the enemy. So those kind of missions, I had nothing like that.
Yeah.
But still, we had a couple where we stacked up the bodies.
Yeah.
And you just never forget that. And so with those kind of missions, in my first book, there's several stories like that. Then I redid that book about 10 years later. The second book in 2007 was On the Ground.
Yep, that's the one I had a chance to read.
Yes, sir. And so the very first chapter is one of my favorite chapters where the recon team watches the enemy move at night.
Yeah.
And an hour before sunrise, one of the enemy soldiers goes up to one of his guys and goes, "Hey, it's your turn for guard duty." They were in contact for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
A King Bee came in. Again, South Vietnamese came in, a pilot, and pulled their team out and saved their bacon.
Yeah.
And that was the second book. The third book came out in 2017, and that dealt with Operation Tailwind that we mentioned earlier, the 4-day mission.
Yes, sir.
Deep into Laos. And we have other stories in there. But that was, and the medic from that mission on Operation Tailwind was Gary Mike Rose, who earned the Medal of Honor, received it from President Trump October 23rd, 2017 at the White House. And we were all there for that.
Nice.
So that was the third book.
So, you've written these 3 books, which once again, it's like I said, I think it's so important that these experiences are like memorialized somewhere because it just seems to me like there was a 20-year gap, between
There was.
the early 70s to late 80s where this just wasn't talked about. You know
No.
what I mean? So I think it's so great that there's an opportunity for these stories to be heard. I don't want to use the word celebrated, but just to be heard and understood and to just be able to look at it from the lens of people that were there. You've had another unique opportunity in that you've worked closely with Jocko Willink, and you've had an opportunity to tell these stories through your podcast, specifically about the operations that were taking place with MACV-SOG, and that's through the SOGcast. Is that right?
Correct. And again, it spins off from Jocko Willink, a Navy SEAL who had 2 tours of duty in Iraq. Second tour of duty, he was the OIC for the Battle of Ramadi.
Yeah.
He was the OIC for Task Force Bruiser that worked with several other units to retake that city, building by building, urban warfare at its worst. And they did it. He lost good people there.
Yeah.
So he got a copy of Across the Fence. We did the first interview with Jocko on Jocko podcast number 180, my first one, which was June of 2019, and my world changed thereafter.
Yeah. How old were you when that happened?
Oh my God, I was really old, man.
I mean, you're older now, what
I'm
I mean?
a lot older now. But I was like 70, what would it be, 72, 73.
What did it feel like when you were, to be in your early 70s and all of a sudden to see all this renewed interest and vigor and your stories, your ability to get other people to share their stories as well? It's almost like, this is probably your 3rd, 4th, 5th career at this point, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And, and with Jocko Willink, before I did the podcast with him, the first one, I did a little research, looked around. This guy's the real deal.
Yeah.
And my wife had even told me that in 2017, she goes, there's a Navy SEAL. He really does these great podcasts. And he had interviewed Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I'm going, oh man, that's really cool. But I never got around to it. So anyway, Jocko gets a copy of the book. He calls me. We do 180. 2 weeks later, we do a Jocko podcast, 181.
Yeah.
Well, the first one's now had over 1 million views, as has the second one.
That's incredible.
Did a third, and then after the second one, I'm driving home, and I pulled into the parking lot, and the Jocko calls, said, "Hey, my other guest just canceled. Can you come back next week?" Of course, Jocko. So I go back, we do 182, and then in July, we did a joint interview, myself and the Frenchman.
Yeah.
Jocko podcast 186 was just amazing. He posted on about July 16th, and the Frenchman died the following week.
Oh my gosh.
And it hit home so hard, and people reacted to that story.
Yeah, so, I mean, but like, understand, so important that the stories are being told
So
now more than ever.
Oh yeah. And so over time, I mean, I've always thought our stories were worth of being told.
Sure.
And now that they're getting out there, people respond. 99.99.5% of everybody's positive.
Yeah, of course.
There's always a couple geeks, that's fine.
Hey.
If you don't like it, that's okay. Kill a commie for Christ. Go ahead, you do it on your own terms. But with us, it was with Jocko. Then, near the end, because I did a total of 8 interviews with Jocko.
Yeah.
And over the 7th and 8th ones, he said, "Hey, let's start doing a thing called, Sogcast." Jocko, that's a great idea. I'll get these people lined up for you, and you can interview these guys and continue the legend of Sog. I so appreciate it. So we do the 8th interview, which was with Captain On, the King Bee pilot, that saved our team, that saved Pat Watkins the first day, that first story in On the Ground.
Sure.
And he goes, you're going to interview these guys. You interview Sog guys. I said, Jocko, with your skill, your talent, and your money, we can go places. He goes, no, I'll pay for it.
Yeah.
And he did. I've now done 45 interviews for Sogcast, and they get posted first on Spotify and Apple.
Yep.
And Echo Charles and his staff that works with Jocko, and of course Kerry Helton. Those guys work hard with Jocko.
They do.
And so then they follow up, and we got 42 that are up for listening now through Spotify and Apple.
Yep.
And then on YouTube, we've got 24 that have been posted there.
Fantastic.
They're a little slower following up, and this has been going on for a couple of years now.
Sure.
But every time everyone gets posted, we got a lot of positive reaction. And it's Jocko. Jocko's done more for getting our SOG, some of the Green Beret sidebars out, than anybody in the Army.
Yeah.
Which is kind of embarrassing, but I am personally eternally grateful. And he interviewed one of our guys, a guy named Dick Thompson, who did a book, 2 books now. And the first one is SOG Codenamed Dynamite. And his books, when Jocko did the first interviews, I couldn't even believe it. Yeah. I called up Dick and said, Dick, I heard your stories. I feel like a wimp compared to your stuff.
Yeah, that's how, hey, listen, that's how I feel.
And that's Jocko. Thank you for asking and mentioning that.
Yeah, no, of course. And, Green Berets give Navy SEALs a fair amount of a hard time.
Always.
Yeah.
That's we're back here in the States. We give each other a lot of grief.
Yeah. Hey, it's compulsory that I give Navy SEALs shit. I just want to make that super clear. But, I think a lot of people, when they look at Jocko and the type of content he produces, stuff like that, they think it's just like a Navy SEAL who's like, waking up early in the morning and telling you to like do some kettlebell swings and make your bed or whatever. But when you actually look behind the curtain, he's surrounded by an absolute fantastic team.
On top of that, he was an English major.
Yeah.
So when he writes, and some of his opening lines, some of his podcasts are just magnificent. His early one on Henry V.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, quoting Shakespeare.
He is. Contrary to popular belief, he is a thoughtful guy. And what I like about him most is there's a lot of people out in the veteran space making their way in the world. He never has anything bad to say about them.
No.
He never has anything bad to say about other veterans. And as a matter of fact, as far as I can tell, he does everything inside of his power to prop up other veterans.
Oh, absolutely. Past,
present, and future. And if there's anything that you can do as a veteran, a powerful thing that you can do in the veteran community, is that sometimes we can be a little bit. We can be cannibals. We eat our own sometimes, right?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah, sadly, yes. But if there's anything that you could do to have a positive impact in the veteran community as a veteran, it's to prop up other veterans.
Absolutely.
And listen, if you've got something bad to say about a veteran, maybe keep it to yourself and then figure out a way to say something good.
Well, and plus, you've got a lot of veterans. In Vietnam, 1 out of every 10 service members were actually assigned to combat. 11 Bravo or Special Forces or the Rangers. And when we had our nonprofit running, there were a couple guys, one in particular who said, "Hey, I was in the Air Force, but I didn't do anything." I go, "What are you talking about?" I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, we had those F4s and I put the bombs on there. I did this, I did that." I said, "Wait a minute. No, I'm on the ground. If you didn't put the bombs and the bullets on that plane,
That's right.
I'd have no support.
Yeah.
So your job is just as important, a little different, but without you doing your job, I can't kill the commies that are trying to kill me."
Yeah. As I've gotten older, I know what I did in the military was hard, right? And I know there are portions of it that were difficult, but as I've gotten older, I realize more and more it's less important about what I did, and it's more important about what we all did. You know what
Oh,
I mean?
absolutely.
And I think collectively what we were all able to do as a generation, it's the longest time anybody's ever been at war in a conflict with an all volunteer army, and I'm proud of that.
Sure.
I'm really proud of that. So I asked this to all of our guests towards the end of the podcast. Is there anything now you have written great books. You currently have the Sawcast, which is a great repository for information about Vietnam veterans serving in special operations, and you've got great platforms. But what's something that you're reading right now, something you're listening to that's given you maybe peace or a great source of inspiration, or something that you would recommend to other transitioning veterans out there to help them along their way, to help them along this journey?
Well, there are the whole era of veteran podcasts, everything from Sean Ryan to Michael A. Glover, Andy Stumpf.
Oh yeah.
These guys they're getting into contemporary topics and as well as some historic stuff.
Yeah, they are.
And I just think that those are, and of course, Jack Carr.
Yeah.
I mean, Jack with Terminal List. And now they're doing a prequel.
Yeah.
And then he's working on a seventh book. I don't know how this guy gets it all done.
Yeah.
He's up there on a hilltop in Utah breathing that rarefied air. But
that rarefied air.
he's just kicking ass and taking numbers. Then you've got Evan Haffer over at Black Rifle Coffee Company.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Everything he's been, I mean, I think that's the benchmark for veteran achievement for this generation, right? He's built something amazing.
Yeah, December 1st, 2019, myself and Pat Watkins were at the Black Rifle Coffee Company headquarters, did a podcast with Evan when he came out with MacV coffee.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I love it.
Pretty cool.
We were there and they sold out 1,500 bags of coffee that day.
Yeah. So that's a great advice, for individuals. Tune into those veteran podcasts. Keep your finger on the pulse of the veteran community. If you were to give,
because don't forget, some of those podcasts are guys that, like, you listen to the very first podcast of Sean Ryan and Mike Glover. They both talked about their depressions.
Yeah.
How individually at one point they were thinking about eating their gun.
Yeah.
These are guys that are such outstanding examples.
You would never think, right? Because they're like the paradigm. They seem strong, they seem confident. You're like, but I think it helps to know it's like, hey, if they have problems, it's okay if I have problems.
Absolutely.
That kind of thing.
And I think that every veteran can take hope from that.
Yeah.
And like you said, have one guy you can call.
Yeah.
That you can call 24/7. There's somebody there. I've always had somebody like that in the background. And I've been very blessed. I mean, in the last 30 years, I've got this woman who said yes.
Yeah.
And you'll meet her later today. And so she keeps me squared away, dusts me off when I'm down there. But I couldn't have done the books and I couldn't have done the podcast without her saying, go get him.
Yeah.
That support.
And when we went and got lunch, I remember this. I tell this story to people like on the bus because I think it's a great story. We were getting lunch, and as we were getting lunch, you put in a whole separate order, and you were meticulous about the order.
Oh, yeah.
And as you were done giving the order to our server, it was a nice young lady, and there was also that young man that were helping us out.
Yeah.
You looked them dead in the face and you go, that's for my sweetheart. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I remember thinking to myself, I was like, hell yeah.
She's got a big appetite. You got to feed that woman.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll be glad that you mentioned that.
Absolutely.
My wife is the same way. She'd be eating green beans all the time. It's like 6 a.m. in the morning, just eating a bowl of green beans. So my second question is, if you were to give a piece of advice to transitioning veterans, somebody who's potentially is going to have a rough transition or they're fearful about what it's going to be like to transition from military life into the private sector, or even if you were to go back in time and give yourself some advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh, well, today we're very fortunate. I mean, NGOs, some places have really bad reputations due to the number that are involved with attacking our country
Yeah.
clandestinely. But there are nonprofits that are more than ever out there to help veterans.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a blessing. And the epitome of that is Warrior Rising.
Yeah.
So if you're having a bad day, there is hope, there is help. You just got to take the second to stop feeling sorry for yourself and go look a little bit. Even if you have to use Google, go on. And if not, you call a buddy. And there's always a source that you can turn to. If not, you turn to the Bible.
Yeah.
Try a little self-education, and everybody in the Bible has their stories about their tough days.
Yes, sir.
And that's why every of the big five that we just named, along with Jocko, they've all had stories of people that have been through tough times.
Yeah.
And they're inspirational. When you hear these guys' stories that they've talked to, and the women, I mean, like Jocko interviewed the mother of, was it Mark Lee, the guy who got blown up, and the mom, her story was just so compelling. And he interviewed the survivor of Auschwitz, episode, Jocko Podcast 219,
Yeah.
of Mrs. Schindler. Her story, I mean, it was like to be before World War II in a little village in Poland, how the anti-Semitism rose.
Yeah.
And then during World War II, a lot of family gets wiped out in death camps. She survived and came back and wrote about it.
Yeah.
With her husband, who was a survivor. And you see this, and then you see the anti-Semitism today. It's like, oh my God, hard to believe. But those kind of podcasts that have that help, the people, the individuals, and those are inspirational. I mean, time and time again, listening to these gentlemen.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I walk. So every day I need that hour. Back when I was in Oceanside, I'd always be working. I'd be on the phone. But now a lot of podcasts, I'll listen to these guys because it's just so inspirational.
Yeah. Well, great recommendations, and then great resources, of course. John, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast today. It's a great conversation once again to hear about like the history, how you joined, what your experience was like, and all the tremendous things that you've been able to do since then. And then, of course, what is seemingly late in life, you're here you are probably on your fifth or sixth career, and still have a prevalent voice in the veteran community. I think that's a fantastic thing. And it gives me hope that, in the next 30 or 40 years for me too, like I'll still be able
You'll
to
be there, Ben. No doubt. You're in shape.
I hope so.
Just keep eating those green beans, buddy.
Yeah, I know, man.
But like in my case, I was very fortunate. I had good South Vietnamese.
Yeah.
I'm alive today thanks to my team.
There you go.
Thanks to the King Bee pilots and all the aviators that supported us.
Yeah.
And the guys that died saving our bacon.
Yep. Yeah.
And quite an experience, brother.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're on the back end of it and here with us today. If you want to find out more about Warrior Rising, you can head over to warriorrising.org. And then, of course, if you are looking into participating as a transitioning veteran who's interested in entrepreneurship, you can always email us at programming@warriorrising.org. And then, of course, follow us on Instagram. We are Warrior Rising. For more updates on our podcast, for great guests like John here, and then, of course, more to come. Thanks for joining us again today, John. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you again. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thank you. I will, sir.